I have faced the rough and tumble of politics. I believe in robust debate, scrutiny, and challenge. It is a cornerstone of our democracy. But what I and my family have faced in recent weeks is not political debate. It is abuse. It is intimidation. It is behaviour that should never ever be treated as normal. And no one is to blame except those choosing to abuse and make threats. That statement was made by An Taoiseach Simon Harris after 2 of 3 separate threats were made against his family over the course of a week. A woman was arrested in connection with a threat to kidnap Simon Harris's children that was made on social media. She was then released without charge pending a file being sent to the Director of Public Prosecutions. This threat was followed by graphic threats made against a member of Harris's family a few days later. The third incident in the space of a week occurred shortly after, when different callers contacted at least 3 different Garda stations claiming a bomb had been planted at Simon Harris's family home in Wicklow. It's rare that I agree with anything Simon Harris says, but credible threats, whether against politicians or otherwise, should never be normalised. Political violence or credible threats of same are never the answer, and it should go without saying that his children are off limits. They are not to blame for his actions. Anger and backlash against the man himself I can understand, but I will never understand or condone violence or credible threats of violence. That's where my agreement with Harris ends, however. While I absolutely condemn all credible threats made against him, especially those made against his family members and, in particular, his children, I can see in that very statement the reasons for the overwhelming public anger that has been directed his way. He claims that he believes in robust debate, scrutiny, and challenge. Is that why he's blocked half the country across social media? I was blocked after tweeting that the upcoming presidential election won't merely be a poll on Simon Harris, that it'll be a poll on Fine Gael's policies in general, a topic I spoke about at length in my last video. The tweet was critical, that's it, and I was blocked for it. There are many other examples of people being blocked for similar posts or questions put to Harris in the wake of Harvey's death, or for simply posting hashtags calling for justice and his resignation. I am in no doubt that Simon Harris is taking full political advantage of these alleged threats made against him. I only say alleged because, quite honestly, it would not surprise me to learn that the threats have been exaggerated to some degree. Simon Harris and Fine Gael have shown themselves to be liars many times. You just have to look at all their empty promises to children to see that. Promises I've covered many times on this channel. At this point, if Simon Harris or anyone from Fine Gael told me that the sky was blue and the grass was green, I'd go outside to double check. I'm not saying these threats didn't happen exactly as reported. I'm simply saying it wouldn't surprise me if it transpired that one or more of them were exaggerated. That's all. But it is clear that these threats came at a very convenient time for Simon Harris, and he is taking full political advantage of it. He references it himself in that statement when he says, "But what I and my family have faced in recent weeks is not political debate, it is abuse, it is intimidation." The telling part here is faced in recent weeks. Weeks, plural. He made that statement on Saturday, September 6th, a day before the bomb threats. The first threat was reported the previous Sunday. That is 1 week. He said it himself. Last week, direct threats were made against my children, and now this weekend, late last night, vile and horrific threats were directed at a very close family member. Yet he says, in recent weeks. And this illustrates quite simply why threats of political violence are regressive, unhelpful, and quite frankly a stupid thing to do. As a result of these threats, Simon Harris can now conflate the justified backlash against him in the wake of Harvey's death with these unsavoury threats, and thus write them all off as intimidation and abuse. It throws all the justified anger and criticisms made against him about his political failures in with the perpetrators of the violent threats, in with those who represent a tiny minority. It means he can now ignore all criticism because those who threatened him have given him permission to tar anyone saying boo to him with the same threatening brush. Threats get us nowhere. Making threats is regressive to the pursuit of a fair and civilized society. But conflating threats with genuine anger and backlash is just as dangerous and disingenuous. He said during an interview with News Talk that politicians deal with a degree of abuse that is probably much more than anyone should take. What is classed as abuse? abuse? Is hashtag resign Harris abuse? Is hashtag justice for Harvey abuse too? Tarring all those who are critical and justifiably angry with him as being threatening and abusive is gaslighting in the extreme, and will only serve to increase public anger, which you'd have to wonder is maybe the point, given what could only be described as trolling and goading by Harris himself with his Oasis selfies and the likes. There is never ever any introspection by these much maligned politicians as to why there is so much anger directed at them in the first place. It never seems to occur to them that their policies and political decisions have real-world, palpable effects on people. They allow themselves to fall into their insulated bubbles and forget and ignore the people who are at the coalface of their decision-making. Government ministers in this country will never feel the pinch when they go to the till with their weekly shopping. They will never recoil in horror and fear at their latest energy bill. They will never have to worry if they can pay their rent. They will never have to worry about maybe having to move back in with their parents. They will never have to worry if they can afford to keep their car. They will never have to decide whether to keep paying the ever-increasing health insurance prices or risk going without. They will never have to worry about timely access to healthcare for themselves or their family. No minister will ever have to watch their child struggle to breathe while deteriorating on endless wait lists for urgent surgery. And yet, they wonder why people are angry. Now, again, anger doesn't excuse making threats against anyone, but a very real danger, as seen by Simon Harris's reaction, is that politicians write off all criticisms as abuse and ignore the very real concerns of the citizens, thus perpetuating the cycle of anger and backlash against them. Hashtag resign Harris is not abuse. It is a justified reaction of people who have the ability to care about others. But the actual threats made against Simon Harris and indeed other politicians leads them to believe that the best way forward is to ignore it all and clamp down on what they see as the source of this abuse. Over the coming days and weeks, I will consult with my Fine Gael government and broader political colleagues about these threats and intimidation online and what action we can and should take. And there we see the perceived source online. He goes further in an interview with the Journal where he says, "I think it really deserves very serious consideration and challenge by all of us, by policymakers, by law enforcement authorities, and by all of us in terms of our own individual behaviour." He goes on to say, "It doesn't matter where the threat happens, doesn't matter if it's online, offline, in person, anonymous, threats against people, threats against children. And I think in many ways we're trying to apply 20th century policies, laws, law enforcement practices to the 21st century. I think that needs to be considered." Fine Gael are already eyeing up a ban for social media for anyone under the age of 16. Social media is clearly in their crosshairs. But before I go any further on this train of thought, I need to ask, if Simon Harris is seriously considering banning social media for under 16s as he says he is, why is he posting pictures of his children on his very public social media accounts? He's a millennial and an avid user of social media to his own ends, so how on earth can he not see the danger in parading his children on his public accounts? And before anyone accuses me of victim blaming here, we should all be able to leave our doors unlocked all day and night, right? But we don't, do we? Because we don't live in a perfect utopian society. Bad things happen every single day. So why on earth would a politician expose their children to the world via social media? As a mother, I just can't understand it. My private social media is locked down as much as possible. The same goes for my husband, and we would never ever post pictures of Cynic Jr. publicly, and we're nobodies. The only thing I can come up with is that Simon wants to show off his family for political gain, to show himself as a caring father, but that can be achieved without posting identifiable pictures of children for the world to see. Anyway, back to the issue of banning social media. As I said, Fine Gael are eyeing up a ban on social media for under 16s. Now, regardless of how you feel about teenagers' access to social media and the online world, ask yourself, how will that ban work in practice? Well, Simon Harris referenced Australia, and in their new law, ID checks will be one form of age assurance, and platforms will need to check the ages of all all user accounts. Goodbye anonymity, hello government overreach, because you know it won't stop at simply banning under 16s. The very first issue that was brought up in Dáil Éireann after the summer break was how terrible social media is. Not Harvey, not the many other kids suffering, no, social media. On Ceann Comhairle, Verona Murphy made an opening statement before leaders' questions where she called for the Dáil to unite against threats and abuse, again conflating the two. She mentions the need for concrete legislative proposals, while also taking aim specifically at unverified profiles on various online platforms which facilitate unsavoury discourse and foster unhealthy narratives that bear little resemblance to fact or reality. If the narrative bears little resemblance to fact or reality, then it should be very easy to disprove, but I'll come back to that point shortly. She goes on to say that it is incumbent upon us all to collectively defend the integrity of political debate and cultivate an environment that encourages participation without fear of reprisal, and how the Dáil must collaborate so that discourse is consistently respectful. With the utmost of respect, that is a load of absolute bollocks, and she knows it. Without fear of reprisal. What, so politicians should be able to constantly up with disastrous results for ordinary people, results that in some cases cause very real harm, and be led away with it? Consistently respectful, she says. Where was the respect from Simon Harris to Harvey's parents when he hid from them and only called them when he was shamed into it? Or indeed from any of the many other government politicians who haven't bothered or simply paid lip service? Respect is earned, not given. If politicians want to create that world that she talks about, then it starts with themselves and their actions. And a couple of things must also be said here before I go further. First, no one forces someone into politics into the public eye. Many of those who have chosen that path seem to forget they are supposed to represent and work for the public, not the other way around. Second, no one forces politicians to use social media. If you make the choice to use social media for your own ends, then you should suck it up and deal with the whole package. Remember, words are simply words. Sure, abuse might be unsettling, but even abuse is not violence. It is simply words, and words, no matter how unpalatable they are, cannot hurt you. But that whole spiel by Verona Murphy, coupled with the narrative of Simon Harris and others, means I can't see these bans on social media as anything other than the beginnings of the stifling of anonymity and freedom of expression, under what I'm sure will be the guise of bringing accountability online. Yet as we've seen from the threats against Harris, a woman was caught within days of the threat against his children. Harris said that the person made an anonymous account to threaten his children. Now, if she was caught within days, then surely that means the protections online are already sufficient. So why would we need anything extra? Why does there need to be any action taken? It seems to me that when push comes to shove and genuine threats are made, that those responsible can be found quickly. Well, when they're in the country, that is. It would appear that some of the threats made were made from outside Ireland. Now, surely that also negates the need for more action to be taken, or at least the actions that Simon Harris is referring to. The action that needs to happen, in my view, is not a crackdown on social media. It is a full and comprehensive introspection from politicians as to why there is so much toxicity, as they keep putting it, directed at them. I've covered this before, but it's now being thrown into sharp focus as a result of these threats against Harris. Social media is not to blame for the anger that is directed at politicians. Social media is simply an instrument that allows people to speak instantly to each other. And what are they saying? They are calling out failures of our politicians. It is those failures that are to blame for the anger. As I said earlier, government ministers, the ones who make the decisions, never have to feel the effect of those decisions. But we, the ordinary people, do. And when we see politicians making promises and failing to keep them, well, trust gets eroded. In my view, the reason why the anger and backlash is reaching such a fever pitch, and not just here in Ireland, but all around the world, is because the trust is gone. There is no trust in politicians to do as they say they will, or to be honest and transparent. never mind accountable. There is no trust in the media to report on things accurately and in a timely manner. Hell, trust is being eroded in science. Science, the very pursuit of truth itself. And the world is losing trust in it. Why? Because the truth that is pursued can so easily become the truth that is needed by the highest bidder. Add all that together, and is it any wonder why people begin to doubt everything they hear? Is it any wonder there's so much anger in the world? I'm reminded of an episode of the kids' TV show Bluey, which I'm sure every parent of young kids knows off by heart. And if you don't, you're missing out big time, because it's a genuinely awesome, funny and wholesome show, even for parents, so go check it out. Anyway, there's a particular episode called Promises. In it, promises get broken and end up getting used to trick others. Bluey's mom, Chili, calls out the behaviour by explaining that the whole point of promises is to build trust. She then points to their surroundings and says, if there's no trust, none of this is possible. The kids question it, asking, what, none of the whole world? And Chili says, yep, without trust, there's no libraries, no roads, no power lines. A simple yet powerful message in a kids show that highlights exactly why we have so many problems in the world and explains how they can be fixed. Without trust, everything falls apart, and we are seeing that the world over. As I said, people don't trust their politicians to do the right thing or to do what they've promised they will. People don't trust the media because we can see the biases that are becoming more and more obvious and entrenched. And science is becoming the Homer Simpson meme of, oh, people can come up with statistics to prove anything, Kent. 40% of all people know that. Add in the new era of AI, everything from art to pictures and videos to news articles, and well, all trust is lost. And when there's no trust, people get cynical, suspicious, and angry, and they close themselves off from reason. What we are seeing on social media is the manifestation of that. People are losing all trust in the institutions that are supposed to tell the truth. Sure, you just have to look at the reporting on the Simon Harris threats. After the bomb threats were made, several news outlets, including our state broadcaster RTE, alleged that the calls were made through Telegram, which enables callers to disguise their identity. This was called out instantly on social media because, as it turns out, and as a simple Google search would tell you, you can't make calls to a landline from Telegram. How can we trust the media when they get simple details wrong? And when they get the simple stuff like that wrong, well, you can't blame people for wondering what else they get wrong and why they've gotten it wrong. And that right there is why politicians hate social media. Oh, they'll use it for their own ends, but because it offers ordinary people fast access to more accurate versions of the carefully curated stories politicians and the media tell, they can't stand it. When the Niall Collins story broke, Micheál Martin stood in the Dáil and bemoaned hashtags, algorithms and trends, rather than his own party members' questionable actions. He and others like Simon Harris now would rather ignore the reasons people get angry and instead have a go at the platforms giving them a voice. They are quite simply annoyed because their failures are being called out instead of being brushed under the carpet. What's done in the dark has been brought to the light and they can't stand it. Perhaps they should simply stop running from accountability. We have our Minister for Culture, Communications and Sport, Patrick O'Donovan, waffling on about the usual misinformation and disinformation, and now the new malinformation. What is malinformation exactly? Well, it seems he might have meant gossip, and well, in that case, I've got news for him. Gossip has been around since time immemorial. Gossip isn't always a lie either, but this again highlights why taking aim at social media is redundant. Social media is simply a way for people to communicate. It is society amplified. In society, we have good and bad. We have truth tellers and we have liars. We have nice people and we have arseholes. And social media is no different. You want to stop the anger and the gossip online? Well, then address the reasons behind the anger and the gossip offline. If politicians truly want to see less anger directed at them on and offline, then it's on them to start rebuilding the trust that they have destroyed. All they have to do is keep their promises, be honest, transparent, and accountable. It's not too much to bloody ask, right? Right? The truth. That's what the world needs more of. The simple, unfiltered, verifiable truth and the accountability it brings. So what do you think? How do you feel about threats against politicians? What do you think about Simon Harris's handling of threats made against him? What do you think about social media? Is it all just a cesspit in need of crackdown? What do you think politicians can do to stem the tide of anger directed at them? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe and hit that bell icon to be notified of new content. If you want to support the channel, you can buy me a coffee or a super thanks, which is greatly appreciated, and a huge thank you to those that already have. You can also follow me on Twitter. Until next time, slán go fóill.